dear, beloved Daddy, a few weeks ago I wrote you a letter and waited impatiently for an answer. But yesterday I received the most terrible response in the world, that my dear father was gone. He tried very hard to wait for me, but had gone without even being able to say goodbye. I've always known that he cherished every moment of my life in his heart, rejoiced my victories, and suffered when I was troubled. From the very beginning, we have been soulmates who warmed each other's hearts. I remember the times when the previous regime threw him into prison at the age of 70 to have me crushed and destroyed. He endured it all, even when they tortured him, without guilt or conviction, till this old but strong man had a stroke in prison. I will never forget when the doctors performed a complex surgery on him, whilst authorities of the regime had him bound with handcuffs to a hospital bed. I was in the hospital by his side when he woke up, and the first thing he told me was that he loved me as his own child and that he was ready to endure any hardships for me. He was and will remain my real father, not just a father-in-law who has always been close to me, showing his love and support. Now I do not want to say goodbye to you, my father, because I want to believe that you will stay with me, with a family that loves you, with your children and grandchildren, with your beloved one for whom you have never lost the feelings which you carried throughout your life. I know that you would never leave us without your care and support. Father, I wanted to visit you today so badly, to hug and kiss you one last time, but it was not possible. I want to ask for forgiveness that you had to endure so much pain and suffering because of my fight and troubles, for losing your health in this fight, and now your life too. I've always known that you would stay close to us and never let us down, that you would never show any weakness. You have always been able to endure any blow for your family, for you had so much life force in you. Now you will protect all of us the way you always could and did. I will continue to write letters to you for a long time, because I will not accept the fact that you are gone and that the family is left without a father. I love you, and I ask the Lord to embrace you and that you always stay with us. I cherish you, my beloved one. We will always love you and think of you, your daughter.
There was a very, very sad period in her time when the father of her husband died, Mr. Gennady Tymoshenko, who was very close to her. And you know that Yulia lived without her father, and Gennady Tymoshenko was as her father. And she wrote him a letter naming him my father. And there was a very, very severe period of time. And I think that the faith in God helped her very much in this situation.
The trial against Yulia Tymoshenko began on June 24, 2011. The current president of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, accused Yulia Tymoshenko that in 2009 she abused her position as prime minister and signed a harmful agreement with Russia over gas supplies and the transit of gas to Europe. The judge who led the process was named Rodion Kirigiev, and he was only 31 years of age. 2 months prior to the start of this trial, President Yanukovych himself ordered that this judge be transferred from a small provincial court to the court in Kiev. Conditions of the trial were desperate. Although the process should have been, by law, open, it was held in a room of only 40 square meters. The judge refused the request of defense lawyers for the trial to be switched to a larger courtroom. Even the representative of the EU, José Manuel Pinto, said that the conditions were desperate and highly irregular. Outside the courtroom, mass crowds protested, but the police were brutal towards them. Yulia Tymoshenko claims that these charges are politically based and not criminal. The purpose behind them is to remove her from Ukrainian political life. The prosecutor claims the opposite. The judge would not even allow Tymoshenko to present her defense. Her lawyers received court documents of over 5,000 pages just 3 days before the trial began. Therefore, one of the defense lawyers withdrew and gave up. And after he objected to the judge about the conditions of the trial, he fell ill and was taken to the hospital. Yulia Tymoshenko wanted her defense team to bring in lawyers from abroad, but the judge refused. One of the absurdities of the entire trial was that during one part of it, her lawyers were not even allowed to be in the courtroom during proceedings. The president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, organized his own privately funded protesters, which were driven to the trial by an official police bus. The police even guarded them. There were very few people in the courtroom to begin with, but the judge had them removed as well. One of those ejected was a famous dissident from the Soviet era, Mikhailo Kosev, who stated that even during the darkest days of communism, such trials were not possible. Towards the end, all of the TV crews were forcefully thrown out of the courtroom as well. When this occurred, several cameras were completely destroyed. Therefore, some of this footage was recorded with a cell phone. After Yulia Tymoshenko found out that her arrest was imminent, she made a public statement.
Я звертаюся до вас, щойно отримавши інформацію про те, що Янукович наказав мене заарештувати. Сьогодні у мене ще є всі можливості отримати політичний притулок в будь-якій іншій країні та захистити своє життя, свою свободу, бути щасливою зі своєю родиною. Але я нікуди не буду бігти з України.
The arrest was followed by large public demonstrations. People knew that this was a politically motivated process, and they did not want her to be arrested. Regardless of this, the police were relentless and well organized. Nothing had helped.
Mr. Yanukovych is a very specific guy. When he was young, he was convicted twice for robbery, so not for the political reasons, but for robbery. So he is a normal and criminal gangster, and he has the gangster mentality. So he has the two main values: his family in wide meaning, and money and his power. So he is struggling for his family, for his money and his power, and that's it. For some period of time, especially in 2010, the European politicians tried to recognize him as a European politician, but even they now understand that he is not. He is just a simply criminal person with a criminal mentality like any normal gangster.
Yulia Tymoshenko wasn't even allowed to defend herself. And out of the 30 suggested witnesses, only 2 were allowed by the court. In return, the prosecution had 38 witnesses against Yulia. World leaders loudly voiced their concern about the legitimacy of this trial. Angela Merkel, Vladimir Putin, Hillary Clinton, and others were against this political persecution of Yulia Tymoshenko, many of whom wrote personally to President Yanukovych. The result was a verdict made on November 11, 2011. She was sentenced to 7 years in prison.
Yanukovych understands only the language of force. He he doesn't understand the language of the resolutions, and he doesn't understand the European and international diplomatic language. You see, somehow I tell the people that the main problem of the president's administration is that they have no interpreters from the European language to the gangster language, because he understands only the gangster language.
Who is this woman whose fate is talked about the world over? Yulia Volodymyryevna Tymoshenko was born on November 27, 1960. She was the Prime Minister of Ukraine from January 24th until September 8, 2005, and once again from December 18, 2007 until March 4, 2010. Before entering politics, she graduated from the Engineering and Economy College, and together with her husband, formed several businesses which were very successful.
Після того, як я завершила навчання в університеті, я потрапила просто в таку суцільну м'ясорубку. Це був завод по виробництву озброєння, військової техніки, космічної техніки, такий високотехнологічний завод, як кажуть зараз, оборонки, оборонної промисловості. І я туди прийшла молодим фахівцем і почала там працювати, по суті справи, зразу потрапивши в саму серцевину оборонного комплексу Радянського Союзу. І стикнулася з жорсткою дисципліною, з повною таємністю роботи. Підприємство було засекречене, на якому я працювала, і це також, безумовно, накладає якусь додаткову відповідальність. Ну, в тому числі накладає якийсь такий тягар несвободи. Ти відчуваєш, що ти не можеш бути вільним, ти не можеш сам планувати своє життя, ти не можеш приймати рішення, які можуть в твоєму житті дійсно щось міняти. Ми вирішили, що треба піти, працювати ще додатково, ще на одній роботі. Я, наприклад, дуже добре пам'ятаю свою роботу, враховуючи, що я взагалі не дуже високого зросту, і в ті часи у мене там ваги було всієї 40 кілограмів. Я пішла на таку роботу цікаву, як розвантажувати крупногабаритні шини. Але вже тоді, це було якраз початок 90-х років, тоді вже почала така відлига бути в Радянському Союзі. Вже почали якісь паростки ринкової економіки народжуватися. Тоді дозволили кооперативний рух. Ми з моїм чоловіком були такими піонерами цього кооперативного руху. Батько Сашин, враховуючи, що я без батька виросла, так Сашин батько казав, що ви тримаєтеся за заводську трубу, це єдина перспектива в житті людини. В той час якраз почав розповсюджуватися відеобізнес. Це з'явилися перші відеомагнітофони, перші відеопроєктори, коли можна було в кінотеатрі на великих екранах показувати відеофільми. І ми почали відкривати такі офіційні відеосалони і почали вже трошки заробляти грошей. І почали постачати нафтопродукти в Україну. А потім це вже перейшло на зовсім високий рівень, коли ми організували корпорацію «Єдині енергетичні системи України», і крок за кроком ця корпорація вона стала однією з найбільших на теренах СНД, і ми вже стали дуже відомими бізнесменами.
In 1996, why did she choose to enter politics at all?
Люди на моєму першому сільському депутатському окрузі були в великій біді. І перше, що мені прийшло в голову, це підключити, враховуючи, що я до влади не мала ніякого абсолютно відношення, всі можливості корпорації, яку я очолювала, якою я володіла, для того, щоб цим людям допомогти терміново. І ми почали лікувати, вчити, возити на операції, разом з ними сіяти врожай, закупати пальне, піднімати все це, по суті, справи на руках і ставити на ноги. І я думаю, що люди відчули, що прийшла якась така сила в їх округ, яка може все ж таки їх життя крок за кроком міняти. І треба віддати їм належне. Вони навіть не розуміючи таких великих бізнесменів і маючи якусь соціальну межу між власниками великих корпорацій і їми, простими людьми, які живуть в селі, вони прийняли мене дуже тепло і дуже по-людськи. І мені здається, вони відчули, що їх життя можна міняти. І вони відгукнулися тим, що віддали більше 90% своїх голосів за мене, як за їхнього депутата. Безумовно, я змінила їх життя в окремо взятих декількох сільських районах. Але вони навіть не підозрюють, як вони моє життя змінили. І як вони взагалі мене поміняли. По суті, по цілям, по завданням, по змісту мого життя. І коли я побачила хатинку таку невеличку, вона така похила, ця хатинка стояла, і шибок у вікнах не було, тобто, по суті справи, без вікон. І я так приїжджаю, кажу, це, кажу, кинута хата, там ніхто не живе. А мені там один місцевий керівник каже, та ні, там, каже, живуть люди. І я зупинилася біля цієї хати. По коліна там в цій грязі і в снігу прийшла до цієї хати. Ледве відкрила ті двері, вони вже покосилися, і їх важко відкрити навіть було. І я зайшла, і в цій хаті жити було неможливо, тому що замість підлоги там була долівка. Долівка – це коли просто утоптана глина. Тобто це навіть не підлога, так як ми її розуміємо. І взагалі так тихо було, нікого не було. І я зайшла по цій долівці, прийшла в якусь там каморку і побачила, що там на кроваті, на ліжку лежить літня дуже жінка. Вона закутана вся була, ну, холодно було в хаті, так як на вулиці. І я зайшла, підійшла до неї. Вона так піднялася трошки і прямо цими босими ногами на цю долівку з ізморозю стала. І подивилася на нас всіх, а ми такі всі успішні, щасливі. Вона подивилася і каже, дітки, вибачте, що я так довго живу. Каже, вибачте, що я взагалі живу. І це от якось достало до такого серця, що ну, це словами неможливо передати. Яке це було одночасне і горе, і якесь відчуття такої меншовартості у цієї людини. І сором за те, що от вона так живе, тому що вона вже не може собі дати ради. І у мене от виникло таке в серці почуття, що я просто зобов'язана щось поміняти в цій ситуації.
From the very beginning of her political activity, she was vastly different from many others who used politics to enrich themselves. She did not need politics for her material gains. She considered politics an ideal opportunity to aid her country as an independently financially secure woman. But many used this against her. Her political career was fast and successful. Ukrainians immediately recognized her to be an outstanding scholar and a person who took pride in her pledges. She was elected several times to the parliament. From 1999 until 2001, she became a deputy prime minister for the fuel and energy sector in Viktor Yushchenko's cabinet. She instantly severed a number of contracts which were harmful to her country. Of course, this bothered the then President Kuchma, and this signaled the beginning of the first major conflict in which Yulia was a primary protagonist.
Ви розумієте, я не воювала проти Кучми як проти людини. Я взагалі не знала Кучму як людину по великому рахунку. Я абсолютно не розуміла, чим він живе, якими цінностями, що для нього в житті є важливе. Я боролася з системою, яка прогнила, яка була корумпована, яка була безконтрольна, яка була жорстока, безвідповідальна перед суспільством, абсолютно несправедлива і неправосудна. І Кучма – це було просто обличчя цієї системи, це було уособлення цієї системи. І враховуючи, що я оголосила справжню війну системі, то він просто опинився під рукою на тому місці, де він був. І ставлячи на місце ті речі, які неможливо було залишати так, як вони були в країні, безумовно, я опинилася в стані перших ворогів колишнього президента Кучми. І він досить жорстко почав зі мною воювати, включивши всі пушки і пер'я, які у нього були. Це і засоби масової інформації, і силові структури, і весь чиновничий апарат. І перше, що вони зробили, вони вщент зруйнували весь бізнес. У мене завжди був шлях відступити. Це не значить, що у мене, коли я відчувала, що я вже далеко заходжу, я не могла домовитися з системою, я не могла здатися, я не могла зберегти бізнес, в тому числі виконуючи їх умови і правила. Я завжди могла це зробити. І вони хотіли, щоб я прийшла і сказала, я хочу домовитись. Давайте знаходити порозуміння. Але я цього не зробила. Тому що це було недопустимо в той час, коли я вже на 50% розуміла, якою є політика в країні, як живе влада і що вони зроблять з країною.
Ukraine had many chances to lose Tymoshenko. She endured what many experienced, but never survived. Many, but not this one tiny, persistent lady. Her imprisonment was the ultimate attempt of the authorities, not to break her, but to annihilate her.
У мене не було в серці відчуття страху. І у мене не було відчуття, що я позбавлена свободи, що я позбавлена волі. Тому що відчуття свободи, воно просто з мене випромінювалося. Тому що я робила те, що я вважаю за потрібне робити зараз, як політик для країни. І я роблю це вільно, не припадаючи ні на які невродливі компроміси. І тому свобода, відчуття свободи у в'язниці не пропало. І була дуже велика впевненість, що як би мене не закривали від доступу до засобів масової інформації, як би з мене не робили образ ворога для простих людей, що значна частина людей дуже добре усвідомлює, що я роблю.
It started in August of 2000 with the arrest of her husband, Alexander. Yulia was already restless, running from one courtroom to another.
Я хочу, щоб Генеральна прокуратура бачила, що лякати будь-якими речами, арештами, запрошеннями – це не той випадок. Я з страхом вже розсталася давно, коли взагалі прийняла рішення працювати в Україні в уряді і робити те, що я роблю сьогодні в енергетиці. То я хочу сказати, що скільки їм потрібно разів, стільки я буду і приходити. І я їх не буду балувати, скажімо, такими подіями, як від'їзди, неявки і все інше. Я готова давати всі свідчення, все, що потрібно, тому що я впевнена, що я ні в чому не винна. І я хочу...
And then the Orange Revolution arrived.
По мені, так нації народжуються не еволюційно і повільно тисячами років, а справжні сильні нації народжуються якраз через такі події, як Помаранчева революція. Через натхнення, через підйом, через самоусвідомлення і через реальні суттєві зміни.
The Orange Revolution is a milestone, the peak of a long oppositional struggle, not only in the history of the new Ukraine, but also in the biography of Yulia Tymoshenko. It was she who initiated mass public protests, probably the largest in independent Ukraine.
І ви, ми читаємо Конституцію України, де написано, що найвищим джерелом влади є народ, а не ті бюрократи, які розсілись по кабінетам. Я абсолютно з вами згідна. Кучму геть, бажано разом з Януковичем.
Before the Orange Revolution, Yulia, despite her popularity and her people's support for her to run for president, seems to have abandoned her ambitions in order to contribute to a more collective effort of democratic forces. She makes a decision in these trying times to continue supporting Viktor Yushchenko and to become a public voice in his campaign. This footage spread everywhere.
І зараз від вас
December 26th saw the Orange Revolution result in a fresh presidential election won by Mr. Yushchenko, who duly appointed Lady Yu, the nickname she gained during the Orange protests, as Prime Minister.
Тому що політика стала конкурентною, тому що свобода слова набула своєї ваги, тому що громадянське суспільство усвідомило себе і почало впливати на політику безпосередньо, тому що політики знають тепер завжди, що коли народ піднімається, то політики відповідають.
She had charisma, you know, and I said, wow, this person is a strong person. I don't think that we have charismatic leaders worldwide today. I think there are a lot of efficient people, a lot of people who wow, can administrate very well their countries, but charisma is something that is unique. And if I can single out 4 or 5 charismatic leaders today, I would say Lula, the Brazilian president. I would say Yulia Tymoshenko. I would say Barack Obama. Even Sarkozy is quite a charismatic person.
Знаєте, вона коли працює, вона світиться. Вона палає, вона горить. А більшість наших політиків потихеньку тліють, можливо, навіть і димлять. І тому вона приваблює до себе своєю енергією, своєю силою, своїм переконанням.
She's really extremely talented politician. I met so many people in politics in the world, and she belongs to this group of the most talented.
Paní Tymošenkovou jsem obdivoval jako takovou energickou, statečnou, hezkou političku, jakých je asi docela málo v politice světové.
From the very start of her political life, she never agreed to compromise. She was particularly strong in her fight against corruption. Hence, these were the roots of her conflict with Viktor Yushchenko, the president of Ukraine, and along with Yulia, a symbol of the Orange Revolution.
Так, шановні друзі, відбувається останні 6 місяців. Це прямий зв'язок, прямий телефон з президентом, який за будь-яких обставин завжди бере президент і завжди бере прем'єр. Він, як кажуть, без секретарів. Але останні 6 місяців цей телефон, на жаль, працює тільки в одну сторону. Коли я беру трубку, у відповідь я чую гудки, на які ніхто ніколи не відповідає. І знаєте, що коли немає в кабінеті президента, то може секретар переключити на себе і сказати, що я там протягом 5 хвилин зв'яжу з президентом. Мої дзвінки нікуди не переключаються останні 6 місяців, ніхто не зв'язується. І коли почалася вся ця криза, я багато разів піднімала цю телефонну трубку, яку ви бачите, але жодного разу я не отримала ні відповіді, ні призначеної зустрічі, ні будь-якого діалогу.
In 2009, came a major crisis with Russia and the EU over gas supplies. Yulia Tymoshenko once again showed how smart and pragmatic she was. Everyone praised her role during this major crisis.
Хочу выразить признательность премьер-министру Украины Юлии Владимировне Тимошенко. В сложнейшей ситуации она взяла на себя ответственность за принятие этих важнейших решений, которые способствовали выходу из тупика.
Prime Minister Tymoshenko played a very constructive role, as I said before. And I was also very pleased today to see that both Prime Minister Tymoshenko participated actively in this conference, showing that Ukraine's leadership is fully behind this commitment. This was a very important signal, not only to Europe, but to the world.
Old enemies do not stand still. Presidential elections were coming soon, and Yulia became a candidate for president of Ukraine. Now all those who never supported Yulia in previous years, while she fought for European standards in Ukraine, united against her, as did former enemies as well, Yushchenko and Yanukovych. With the support of several very wealthy oligarchs, Yanukovych became president of Ukraine with only 3.5% of votes more than Tymoshenko. She protested that the elections were irregular, but the court rejected her appeal. Not much time passed when what many expected would happen in Ukraine did. After taking power, Yanukovych created a country where its regime and all the important levers of power were held solely by him. In particular, the financial, judicial, and repressive apparatus. The first to come under fire was Yulia Tymoshenko.
After the last presidential elections, when Mr. Yanukovych wins and Mrs. Tymoshenko loses 3% to him, Mr. Yanukovych understands that he should take off his main political opponent from the political scene. And Mr. Yanukovych is a twice criminal guy and he has a twice criminal mentality. Thus, he creates a situation when the absolutely and totally controlled judiciary system is creating a new absurd accusation against Mrs. Tymoshenko to keep her in jail for life.
She is the only Ukrainian politician who is feared by the current administration. She knows a great deal about their actions in the past. She knows their methods, and she knows best how to fight against them for a better and more just nation. This is the reason why 4 different charges were brought up against her.
We have a very specific judiciary system here in Ukraine. We have such a specific body which is named the Supreme Council of Justice, which have a very wide powers just to punish the judges, to appoint the judges, and so on. And this Supreme Council of Justice is totally controlled by President Yanukovych, because all his guys are just the members of that body. And that's why every judge in this country understands that he could be fired in 5 minutes, and the criminal case against any judge could be opened in 5 minutes. For example, the Prosecutor General, who is the relative of the President, he is the member of the Supreme Council of Justice. The first Vice Deputy Prosecutor General, who is now just making a tour all over Europe saying that Mrs. Tymoshenko is a criminal, he's also the member of the Supreme Council of Justice. So everyone is influencing the judiciary system. And in the courts of Mrs. Tymoshenko, they took a very young guys who are just newly appointed judges. They have no experience, they are totally influenced and controlled, and they are just violating the law every 5 minutes. They are violating the criminal proceeding code, they are violating the human rights, they are violating the rights for defense, and so on. For example, during the hearing in Pechersky District Court, there were 3 or 4 days when Mrs. Tymoshenko had no defense lawyers at all. So she was not defending herself, because she even was not given a word to say. There was just I could show the kangaroo trial. So she was without the defense lawyers. Even there was one day when she was also taken off from the courtroom. So there were the prosecutors, the judge, and the empty bench. So they were judging the empty bench.
I'm not mistaken, nor am I exaggerating. Ukraine's return to the dark world of dictatorship, when not long ago it was so close to becoming a fully accepted part of Europe, is a historic tragedy, both for Ukrainians, but also for Europe and all the free world, because the loss of any one democracy shows how fragile and perilous is the fate of all democracies. Over the last 2 years, the family has ruined all checks and balances inherent to democratic societies. We no longer have the separation of powers into legislative, judicial, and executive branches. They all now do the bidding of one person. Kleptocracy has become the primary governance marker in our country. It is the ruling style of a regime that is transferring into its own grasping hands. Without even the pretense of an open, transparent process, state monopolies, land, even the private enterprises of others. The family wants, the family takes. We have become Zaire under Mobutu, Zimbabwe under Mugabe. Priceless state-owned deposits of mineral resources, the budget, Even funds on deposit with the Central National Bank have become the playthings of the family. Louis XIV once famously said that the state is me. Viktor Yanukovych and his clan live by that same greedy creed.
Viktor Yanukovych is the current president of Ukraine. Throughout his political career, he has faced a number of charges against him. As a 17-year-old, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for theft and assault. A few years later, he was again sentenced to 2 years in prison for assault. Many believe that Yanukovych was put in power by Ukrainian oligarchs who enjoy very close relations with Russian oligarchs. He is constantly accused of putting pressure on the media, intellectuals, and especially opposition politicians. He created constitutional amendments which returned many additional powers back to the president. A number of his actions have compromised the reputation of the country and slowed the democratic process in Ukraine. Due to the politically motivated process against Yulia Tymoshenko, he was criticized by numerous foreign leaders, and the 2012 European Football Championships, which were held in Ukraine, at one point were questionable.
The Ukrainian people are now suffering because of what was going on till the last 2.5 years. Because the Yanukovych was elected saying that he will create a strong reforms in various fields of the people's activity. People have no money, people are poor, people are looking how to feed themselves and their families. They are afraid of the influence of secret service and so on. So the people are waiting for the upcoming autumn elections, parliamentary elections, but that these elections will be not fair. That's absolutely obvious even now, and that will be not the result of the voting. You see, we have such a very old Soviet proverb that wins not that person who is voted for, but who is counted for. So they will count the votes as they need. They will say that the people vote for, as they call stability, and I call that stability as on the cemetery. The main stability is on the cemetery.
Many wonder where the hatred of Yulia Tymoshenko by a former colleague of Viktor Yushchenko comes from. Yushchenko, who himself was poisoned by his now newly formed allies, was one of the witnesses against Yulia Tymoshenko in court.
Starting from 2006, it was Yushchenko who betrayed the ideals of Orange Revolution by allowing himself to be corrupt by Yanukovych clan and letting Russian Ukrainian Energo into the market as monopoly go-between trader of Russian gas with huge corrupt vested interests of political elite that Yanukovych now represents. It was his first betrayal. Signing the Universal Coalition with Our Ukraine, Party of Regions, Communist Party, and Socialist Party, and presenting Yanukovych for Prime Minister was the cost that Yushchenko had to pay for corrupt millions he received from Russian Ukrainian Energo Group. But this cost was tragic for Ukraine, and the situation we're in now is the direct consequence of this betrayal. Then, the Ukrainian diaspora, in their resolution in August 2006, wrote, "Creation of this bandit communist coalition and presenting Yanukovych for the position of Prime Minister with giving him more constitutional powers. This is the shameful finale of the infamous governing of Yushchenko at the position of the president. Members of the diaspora consider that he has betrayed his voters and gave bandits unprecedented rights to rule the country instead of sending them to jail." Opposition politician Grishchenko in September 2012 mentioned, "It is Yushchenko but not Yulia who should be in prison and convicted for gas contracts of 2009, because it is precisely Yushchenko who has sabotaged and canceled the agreement of 31st of December 2008, where gas price was fixed and was much lower. After this, Putin was furious and as a reaction has increased price to $400. During next few weeks, Europe was freezing. There was crazy pressure on Ukraine to solve the crisis, but President Yushchenko went skiing. Yushchenko can be compared to Judas, who sold his country for 30 silvers and continuing to do so despite popular hatred and refusing to hang himself. Perhaps he has debt to Yanukovych, but more likely is threatened by compromising information Yanukovych can have against him, but also threatened by imprisonment.
Because of the conditions in prison in Kharkiv, Yulia went on a hunger strike. She was not permitted to be examined by her doctors, and only following many protests, German doctors were allowed to finally examine her.
For that 1 year in jail, Yulia became more politician than even she was when she was free. She's thinking about the country, she's thinking about how to change the situation in the country, how to build here a real democracy.
Я люблю Україну настільки глибоко, що Україна стала моїм життям. Не родина, хай мене пробачить, ні мої особисті справи, ні мої амбіції. Моє життя – це Україна. І я один раз їй присягнула і буду з нею до останнього свого подиху. В будь-якому статусі, на будь-якому місці, у владі чи в опозиції, за межами політики або в політиці. Це просто є моє життя. Я давно це зрозуміла, і я вже більше цій своїй долі не опираюся.
We also know that her health conditions are not so good. Since the 5th of November last year, she suffered a very strong pain syndrome. She had a very big problems with her spine, and she didn't receive any normal treatment for 8 months because Yanukovych was saying, or the doctors appointed by the state were saying that nothing is going on, she is healthy, and so on and so on. Only under the very big pressure of the European and the international community, the German doctors were allowed to examine her, and after that examination they absolutely strictly said that that's impossible, just to hate the person as she was hated. She is supervised 24 hours a day. She is under video surveillance for 24 hours a day. She's accompanied by 2 and more persons 24 hours a day. Even if she is reading something, someone is looking what she is reading. If she is writing something, someone is looking what she is writing. So she is totally controlled by the regime. Thus, she is very limited in her freedoms. Even I know that for sure, even her meetings with the defense lawyers, with her relatives, are also controlled and supervised.
Faith in God and faith in my Ukrainian peoples gives me the strength to sustain.
Я особисто глибоко віруюча людина. Віра у мене настільки глибоко в серці, що це є щось моє, особливе, інтимне, дуже особистісне. Людина мусить бути в любві, людина мусить бути в вірі, людина мусить бути з Богом і в повній гармонії. І від цього, до речі, я відштовхувалася, коли пропонувала ідею солідаризму як ідею філософії, ідеології нашого життя. Солідаризм – це гармонія, це знаходження на кожному кроці дисбалансу, диспропорції в житті людини. І спроба цю диспропорцію, дисгармонію, цей конфлікт перевести в гармонійне, спокійне русло.
Yulia Tymoshenko sits in prison. Her sentence? 7 years. Her lawyers have appealed to the court in Strasbourg, and there is a strong chance that her charges will be dropped. However, very soon another trial will commence against Yulia, after which there will be a third, and then a fourth as well, as though there is no end to this spiral of hate, or the best and only conclusion for all those who manifested these charges against Yulia would be her death. Who wants to kill Yulia Tymoshenko? Decide for yourself.
There are no more heroes, no Olympus of our time. Freedom is no longer won on the battlefield. Rather, it is behind closed doors where heroes are made. Far away from the glare, the sound and fury of the battlefield, another kind of battle remains. A battle which requires a different kind of hero.
Perhaps there are no heroes anymore because the times do not permit. Perhaps there's greatness not in large concerns, but small. Not in how one acts before the searching eye, or in public view. How one acts when no one sees or hears or knows, or even cares.
They beat me in jail. They humiliate me. Nobody can come and visit me except for the lawyers. They want to isolate me. But my faith in God and in justice is stronger than all their attempts of breaking me or for me to give up. I will fight forever. And with God's help and with the help of my nation, we will win together.